Trump is shit. I think any halfway decent human being, whether on the far left, the left, centre, or moderate right, can probably agree these are the very least pretty incompetent. So the question for me is, how do you mount opposition to this? Especially for someone who, while they may have failed to get the popular vote, certainly has plenty of populist support. And you have to also keep in mind that the Republican wing of American politics now controls everything. The presidency, the House, the Senate, most of the governor races, most of the state governments, and so forth. So from a certain point of view, they do indeed have a mandate for what they're doing. It's also worth noting and respecting, however much you disagree, that Trump is actually fulfilling his campaign promises. We're not used to this in modern politics, particularly on the left. When we elect someone, they immediately walk it back, start making compromises. Yeah, the corruption is obvious. They never really push forward on the things that we elected them for. So, you've got to give some respect there. But what is an effective long-term opposition to this? And what isn't? And I think we're discovering what isn't in the form of these kind of risible, overblown protests, the scale and the ferocity of the reaction, the resorting to violence, the kind of fact-free opposition that used to be the hallmark of the lunatic right, the Tea Party, the FEMA camps, and they're making the frogs gay, and all of that seems now to be the hallmark of the left. You're wearing out the terms fascist and Nazi with frightening rapidity. You're like a broken record on that score.
Piss. Fascist! 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 Piss. Fascist!
Take a Muslim ban as a case in point. Now, it's a stupid action. It's not going to help. It's going to make things worse. There's various legal problems with it. It clearly wasn't prepared well enough. But this isn't the first time actions like this have been taken. Similar actions, if not quite as broad and sweeping, were taken under the Obama administration without much of a whimper or a protest about it. And that kind of hypocrisy and so on can be pointed at by the right when these protests and so on occur. Supposedly it's only inconvenienced perhaps a couple of hundred people, which isn't to say it isn't serious, isn't a problem, isn't indicative of a problem, isn't problematic for international relations and so on, but it's had a relatively small impact, so it seems. Keep in mind, all information is currently in flux as I'm making this video, in spite of having a whole weekend to go over it. But the protests certainly aren't effective. They seem to be solidifying Trump's base with how risible they are, with how extreme a lot of them are. And going back to what I was saying, I don't think this kind of way of going about things is going to be particularly effective. I think in the long run, you need a return to facts and reason. Meeting the enemy on the emotional ground is not going to win the day in the long run. It'll make you feel good in the short term, but in terms of actually changing anything or countering the narrative or whatever, it's just not going to work. They can just scream democracy, even though what they're calling for is autocracy, mob rule. They're going to say that the popular will is behind them. You can see that, again, like with so many things lately, you can see mirrors with Brexit. Every single break, every single check in our democratic system is being ridden over roughshod by, it was a democratic vote. Never mind the judiciary, which is meant to balance that. Never mind parliamentary sovereignty, which is meant to balance that. Never mind the Lords, which is meant to balance that. Never mind any of these things. All of that's being tossed out. We're pursuing the most destructive course of action simply because a slim majority of people support it. In the States, you can point to the popular vote, but they will, so long as it favours them, point to the other elections and point to the Electoral College and everything else. So any opposition will be framed as anti-democratic. They have a ghost of a point in that the popular will supports the more right-wing agenda, even if it doesn't necessarily support Trump. And they will beat that into the ground, and they will misrepresent you, or even accurately represent you, as being against democracy every step of the way. It'll just go against you. So yeah, looking at this Muslim ban. Is it a Muslim ban? Is it that egregious? Like I say, these kind of things have been done before, and travel bans on many disrupted or enemy states are pretty normal. So why the particularly strong reaction? I guess it's in the context of the rhetoric of the election, which was that it would be a Muslim ban, and people are pointing to possible corruption, but you have to be careful with that. I don't doubt, given Trump's character and temperament, that plays something of a role, but obviously he invested in more stable countries who are more closely allies with America, so you would expect to see a crossover, and geopolitics will not allow him to ban travel from America's allies, such as Saudi Arabia and so on. A blanket Muslim ban might perhaps be more consistent in terms of principle and so on. So actually you're looking at a compromise position from the rhetoric of the campaign. Not that anyone's gonna represent it like that. So what's being barred isn't a religion, really. It's not a race. People are different from different nations. It's nationalities. That's not racist. It's not particularly religious discrimination. That might be a cover for some of what's going on, but it's a valid one, I'm afraid. So you need to be careful about what you're doing here. If you misrepresent it and you're exposed as misrepresenting it, then you lose credibility down the line. If you meet everything that he does with abject panic, you've got nowhere to go except really bad places. When he does something genuinely, fantastically awful, which he probably will. So far, everything he's done has been compromised versions of his campaign promises, or things that the right always does when they come into power. He's just guileless. That's the big difference, I suppose. He's undiplomatic and guileless in everything that he does. But otherwise, it's largely business as usual, I'm afraid. I get it. You want a revolution. You want this generation's big fight to be as important and key as the fight of the greatest generation against fascism. He's not fascist. He's a right-wing populist, but not a fascist. He's certainly not a Nazi. And in the UK we have our issues, but May, for all she's an unelected, illegitimate leader, she's not a fascist or a Nazi. She's just terrible. Trump's not a fascist or a Nazi. He's just terrible. And you look as silly as people who try to dress Obama up as Hitler, or saying he's killing for our Gurns or whatever. This isn't going to be an effective tactic. You need to keep your powder dry. Wait for the right moment. You need to give these legal challenges and so on time to work. His ego is huge. Prick that seems to work a great deal. And more importantly, most important of all, you need to reform your left wing. You need to ditch the identity politics. You need to sort yourselves out so that you can mount a challenge at every election from here until the next presidential cycle. That's what you need to be doing if you really want to defeat him. And if he moves to block democracy, then you will finally have the fascist that you want so very, very badly. Now, I did a little experiment over the weekend, which I think illustrates a huge part of the problem. To be perfectly clear, I am against this travel ban for reasons I've gone over briefly here. It's just not going to help at all. It's a pointless pandering move. But I don't think people's objections are particularly consistent. So I ran an experiment. Given the punching of Richard Spencer and the sheer volume of the people who otherwise preach peace and tolerance and understanding, given their huge tidal wave of support for punching him in the face, I was curious, would they support a travel ban, an entry ban on Nazis, neo-Nazis, the far right in general? Given that these are people who have supported travel bans and entry bans on things like pickup artists or contentious speakers of various kinds, there's an inconsistency there. And the majority of people, though I was glad to see quite a few exceptions, but the majority of people were absolutely fine with barring far-right figures from entering the US or the UK or whatever country they happen to reside in. They were perfectly happy to bar people on the basis of ideology, even if we weren't in combat with their nations or whatever. They were just happy to do that. So why do I say that's inconsistent? Well, there are peaceful far-right people who want whatever it is that they want via peaceful means. They have abhorrent, nasty, regressive, repressive viewpoints and ideals and politics, but they are in and of themselves peaceful. And that does make a good analogy with Islam. A lot of you are going to switch off immediately that I say that. But Islam is more than just a religion, it's a complete way of life. Islamism is much more common than in Islam, in the Muslim community, than Christian theocracy is even in a much more religious country like the US than the rest of the secular West. Its viewpoints are abhorrent to what should be many liberal values. It's incredibly repressive of women, it's massively anti-Semitic, it's against the foundations of many aspects of Western culture, such as free expression, for example. So if you're willing to bar people on one ideology that's regressive and repressive and horrible and anti-human, why the outrage at the barring of another philosophy and ideology and way of life and proposed way of doing things that is equally, if not more, horrendous? There's an inconsistency there. Not that this is even a Muslim ban anyway, but if you're willing to bar people on the basis of one particular nasty ideology, why the inconsistency? And I think it's because people confuse religion and indeed nationality with race, and so they see objection to this particular nasty ideology as racism, which it isn't necessarily. And this is going to be the defense, and it's going to be a good defense every single time. So on what grounds can we fight this ban? Well, we can let it play out, we can leave the courts to deal with it, and they already seem to be dealing with opposition. Lawyers seem to think it's unconstitutional and so on. Do the protests do anything? No, not really. They just kind of make you look stupid. Great for building morale amongst people that already agree with you. Not very good for changing people's minds at all. You can play on the emotional side. You can show kids stuck in camps, you can show success stories of successful integration and so on, but that's always going to be outweighed by the terror attacks in Europe and everything else. So it's going to be a hard slog, but you need to go with the facts and not misrepresented facts. That's how you win this in the long term. You correct things back to a place of rationality. You get the media to do its fucking job again, because it's lost all credibility now, and it's going to take a very long time to rebuild those bridges, especially if they continue to be as massively partisan as they are now. You might think it's a good thing that they're partisan, but it didn't help during the election, did it? If they can get back a reputation for objectivity and good work and solid investigation, then over time trust can be rebuilt. And then when genuinely awful things happen that deserve this kind of reaction, then they can speak effectively on it. Everything's so heated right now. You need to take some heat out of the system. You need to cool it down. You need to allow the democratic counterweights and balances that we have time to work. And if they start being genuinely properly overridden and disrupted, then is the time to take to the streets. That's the point at which that becomes justified. When someone starts dismantling the apparatus of government, the apparatus of opposition, legitimate opposition, that's when you take to the barricades. At the moment, you're pumping more heat into the system. You are escalating the problem, and sooner or later, these kind of more genuinely fascistic bully boy tactics are going to be met by the same from the right. So you have to ask yourself a question that you should have been asking yourself for years now. Do you want to feel good, or do you want to be an effective actual opposition? Do you want to actually change things? Do you want to actually effectively stop what he's doing and revive the left? So ask yourself, which of those things is most important to you?
Great! This is it! I've been waiting 2 hours for this! It's a revolution!
What do you mean, revolution?
Revolution! Blood runs! Flags wave! Come on, everybody! Throw down your tools and throw up a barricade! Come on! Run into the Winter Palace!